When I said, when Jan van Riebeeck landed in the Western Cape, our problems began, is a historic fact.
I've decided to write a book about the Boer Genocide in South Africa. But before I do all my research and start writing about that, I thought it a good idea to just do a few short videos, each one more or less corresponding to a chapter in the book, and putting some of my inchoate ideas out there. The first one, and I think for me that's the start of the whole story, and understanding all this violence happening in South Africa, the torture of our farmers, and the various calls by people in authority, and even presidents of South Africa, various presidents, to kill the white population, or to kill at least a section of them, or to drive us out on social media. There have been various calls for all of us to go to Australia. They call us racists, and they say you belong to Australia, or you must go back to Europe. Even though it's very difficult for any of us to get even just a short-term Schengen visa to visit Europe, they want us all to go back to Europe, so-called. The first idea that intrigued me about this whole movement towards the ethnic cleansing of people of European descent from South Africa was the notion that we represent an historical era in South Africa. Our coming to South Africa in 1652 was a mistake of history. First of all, they say that we should never have been here. Therefore, Jan van Riebeeck arriving on the 6th of April 1652, that was a mistake. We should never have come here. We should never have introduced Roman Dutch law and European systems of engineering and government and law, even our culture here. And then there's an even stronger related idea that arose in the 1930s, when a lot of East Europeans, a certain number of them, immigrated to South Africa from countries like Lithuania, Poland, and Latvia. And these people were involved in the whole communist movement in Europe. They had ties with the ex-Soviet Union. And their idea was that the fact that a separate white nation, call them the Boers or the Afrikaners, that had arisen in South Africa, that was a mistake of history. Because their idea was, taken from Marx and Engels in the Communist Party, was that there should be no nations, that the worker has no nationality. But particularly in a country like South Africa, there shouldn't have been an Afrikaner nation, and that in itself is cause for aggression against us. It had two aspects, I think. The one was obviously the racial aspect. Even though they themselves were more or less white, they said that the fact that we are of European descent, and that after hundreds of years we haven't actually assimilated into the other populations in South Africa, that in itself was a mistake of history that needs to be corrected. The second part of that argument is a cultural argument. The fact that we not only have we kept a lot of our European traditions alive, but we've also built upon them. We've developed our language. We developed it, in the same manner as the Quebecois in Canada, I think, but even more so. We developed a separate branch of the Dutch language in South Africa called Afrikaans, with a different grammar, different spelling, even though it's still mutually intelligible with Dutch, and about 95% of the vocabulary is the same. It kind of, yes, it connected with the landscape in South Africa, with the fauna and flora here, and therefore it developed a life of its own, and upon that language we constructed a whole different Africanized Western culture in South Africa. And very strongly you got the idea out of the Communist Party, South African Communist Party, founded by these East Europeans, as well as in their academic writings that eventually penetrated the universities, and that are now more or less the dominant discourse or the dominant ideology in the universities, the notion that that was also a major mistake. And the third aspect of the historical error that the communists or Marxists saw in South Africa, and that leads logically to the idea that we should all be wiped out, was the notion that, the related notion that we are fascists, that somebody clinging to his culture, his language, his traditions, and even developing those into art forms and music and literature and poetry and so on, those are signs of fascism. Also that the Afrikaans culture was associated with a certain social class in South Africa, the middle class, or as they termed it in their Marxist writings, the petty bourgeoisie. Because we were never the wealthiest people in South Africa, even though a few Afrikaners, particularly at present, developed themselves or managed to become extremely wealthy and became millionaires or even billionaires. But the bulk of our people remained more or less middle class. They never became hugely wealthy. Also, the middle class helped the poor that we used to have in the 1930s, and they managed to actually provide them with education and opportunities and employment, so that most of us, a little bit like in the Scandinavian countries, became part of one nation where there wasn't a lot of distinction in terms of class as you have in Europe and probably in Latin America. And because of our strong association, therefore, with the middle class, what the Marxists call the petty bourgeoisie, that also stigmatized us as fascists, and therefore a class and a culture and a people, a race that should be eliminated. And from that moment onwards, from the 1930s onwards, the idea developed that we were aliens in South Africa, coming from the wrong social class, the middle class, and also speaking the wrong language, having the wrong culture. And it only needed the revolution of 1994 to put into motion this process of ethnic cleansing and the genocide that would follow from that.